So behavior-driven development is also known as BDD, and it's an example-based methodology for developing software. The key to BDD is the collaborative exercises between the business, development, and testers. These parties are collectively known as the three amigos. When beginning the work for a new feature, the three amigos, they get together and they write examples of how this feature will be used. And by discussing these examples, all parties come to a shared understanding of how the feature should behave in various scenarios. Let's take a peek into one of these meetings. The Parabank team is building a new feature which will allow customers to withdraw money from their account. The three amigos begin to envision this scenario and how the application will behave. They use a Gherkin syntax, which allows them to use domain-specific language in a given, when, then format. The given, when, then syntax forces us to think about the current state of the system, that's the given, the action that is taken on the system, that's the when, and then the resulting behavior of the system, that's the then. The three amigos decide to draft their first scenario, which is a happy path where the customer withdraws from his bank account. Given a customer has an account and the account balance is $100, this is a prereq that specifies the current state of the system before any action is taken. When the customer withdraws $10, this is the action that's performed. Then the account balance should be $90 and a new transaction should be recorded. This is how the system should behave. So we have a complete scenario described here, and the three amigos now know what it is that they need to build. Practicing BDD has many benefits. Team members are able to collaborate and gain a shared understanding before any development begins, which means any ambiguity or differences of opinion can be discussed very early in the process. Everyone is speaking the same domain-specific language, so there's no confusion about things like terminology. And if it's written in the Gherkin syntax, the scenarios can be used as executable artifacts that drive automated testing of those scenarios. So that Gherkin-style scenario from the meeting can be added to what's called a feature file. This is an example of the feature file, and it serves as input into test automation scripts. However, many teams get stuck right here because a lot of the details about how to execute this scenario are missing. For example, in the given statement, it says that a customer has an account, but which customer? And what's the account information? It says that the customer withdraws $10, but it doesn't give the steps on how that's done. What pages do I need to go to? What UI elements do I need to interact with? And it describes the expected result, but not where to go to verify that result. Because of this, oftentimes I see the testers totally rewrite that concise feature file into something like this. Yes, this provides a lot more detail, but there are some cons to this approach. In addition to reducing the reusability of the steps, these steps also contain a ton of implementation detail, and they explicitly dictate how the automation should be written. Now, one reason that the three amigos come up with the scenarios that focus on behavior and not implementation is because how you make this happen isn't really relevant. And by adding all of this detail, you're losing the intent of the scenario's behavior. So if we don't provide implementation detail for product development, we certainly shouldn't do it for automation development either. So back to our concise scenario that describes behavior. Yes, a lot of the detail is missing here, but that's okay. In fact, it's actually great. And you might be wondering, well, how will we know how to implement this? We leave that to whomever needs to write the automation code. Just as we trust the developers to be able to develop the feature without the implementation details, we can do the same for those developing the automation code. So let's take each one of these steps and see how we can turn this into glue code that actually executes the scenario and also follows good test automation design principles. Okay, I've placed our feature file inside of our code editor. And this is where we're going to write the automation code. Now I'm using a tool called Cucumber, which is really good for taking those BDD artifacts, which is the feature file, if they're written in Gherkin, and allowing you to tie this to some automation code, which is what we're going to do in this exercise. Okay, so there are essentially a couple of things that I need. One is this feature file, and then I'll also need to tie it into some glue code, which is considered the step definition. So we have a step definition file here, and notice I have that under this step defs package. I have the feature file under this features package, and these aren't required. This is just me being tidy. Okay, so this class will have to add some code here that essentially corresponds to these different features. And then finally, the thing we need is a runner. So this is a standard class that will allow me to execute these scenarios. Okay, and in here, the main parts are the glue. And I just specify where these step definition files are. So that's pointing to this package. And then the features, that is specifying where the feature files are. And that's pointing to this package. Okay, I'm going to go back to our feature file. Now we need to create code for each line in here. So we do that inside of the step definitions file. So I'm going to open this file. And let's take this line by line. So if we look at this given statement, the given statement says, given a customer has an account. Again, we don't know which customer this is. We don't know anything about the account information. So this is stuff that needs to be done behind the scenes. It needs to get pushed down. We don't want to add that information here. We want to add it in the code. So I'm going to essentially add that information into a properties file. And I have a little file here that essentially already has the URL to my application and my Chrome driver. So I'm going to just make another section in here for that customer information. So I've added the customer ID and I've added the customer username and the customer password, and this will log me into the application. So I don't have to put that information in my feature file. I'm going to read it from this properties file. Okay, let's look at our feature file again. So the customer has an account and the balance is $100. So before I go to the next step, there's something else that's assumed here, is that not only do I know the customer, but I've actually logged into the application, right? So that's not something that I want to actually put in the scenario. I would have to put that in every scenario that the customer logged in. This is a given. This is something that's understood. So I want to take care of that within our code. So I'm going to make a base class, since this is something that needs to happen before every single test. It's not something I want to put into this feature file. Okay, we have our base test class now, and in here is where I'll go ahead and launch the application and log the user in, as well as close the application once done. Let me go ahead and add that code. So here is the code that launches the application before any tests are run. And I'm essentially reading from that properties file that we talked about. So I'm going to read in all of that information, and those are going to be stored as environment variables. Then I'm launching the browser here, which is reading the property of app URL that is seen here, app URL, and that will launch the browser. And then I call login in this new login component class that I created. Let me show you login. I have logged into the application. I call login getting the properties from our properties file, and actually going ahead and logging in. So I've taken care of a lot of that prereq stuff that we don't necessarily need to specify. So I did need to go in here and say all of that stuff, right? This is stuff that's just known already. So like I said, each one of these steps needs to go into our step definition file. So I'm going to copy this. And this is a given statement. So inside of here, I can add a new given statement and paste that step to it. Okay, I've added this given here, and I will need to add a method here. Now, what I want to show you is how this allows you to be flexible in how you automate these tests. It says that the customer has an account. This is a given. Having an account, what does that mean, right? Does this customer already have an account? That could be possible, and that's fine. But since I'm going to be withdrawing money and things like this, I don't want to use an account that already exists, because any other tests that run in parallel with this, they might clash because I'm withdrawing money. If some other account is expecting a certain total to be there, I could mess that up for them with this test. So instead, I'm going to create my test data right here on the fly. So I'm going to use this statement to essentially create a brand new account. So we have here, create a new account. And not only am I going to create a new account, but I'm not going to do this on the UI. I don't have to do this on a UI. This will take a long time to do on the UI, and it's not a key part of the test. It's only a prerequisite. So I'm going to utilize my application's web services to be able to do this. And to do the web services, I'm going to use a tool that's called Rest Assured. This is my favorite web service tool within Java. And I'm going to create a file that contains all of my API endpoints. And I'm also going to make a little utility that executes the Rest Assured code. So I made this endpoints file. And here I essentially just created a new create count endpoint that has the API call I'll need to create a new account. And then I have the services util here, which has all of the rest assured stuff. Get and post are the two methods that my application supports right now. And I have overloaded methods execute. This one just calls into this one, basically saying, yeah, go ahead and make sure the status code comes back okay. And inside of here, this one takes the endpoint, the method, and then whether to verify the status code or not. And essentially have a little switch statement here. And if you ask me to do the get, it just calls the get or the post. Okay. So going back to our step definition, I'm now going to go ahead and make the call to create the new account. Okay, so I've read the system property from our properties file for the customer ID. With that, I'm able to format this endpoint, which essentially is I'm adding the customer ID to that, and then I'm executing this as a service call. From there, I get a response, and I'm able to extract out the account ID of the brand new account that was created, and I'm going to store this as a variable in my step definition file so that I can utilize it for future steps. This covers the first step of the customer has an account. I've ensured that that's happened. I skipped the UI, did it at the service level. So that's part of the great thing about not putting in the implementation details of click this and click that. I'm able to be smarter about how I implement this. So going back to our feature file, let's see what's the next step. It says in the account balance is $100. Okay, so I need to ensure that in this new account that I made, that its balance is $100. This is a given. Again, this is something that I'm going to do at the service level. Let me add that code now. Okay, I've added the new step to take care of the account balance is, and I used a wildcard here for the amount. That's so that this is a reusable step that I can utilize in future scenarios, okay? And because I'm using a wildcard, I need to specify this as a variable here. So whatever's passed into this, Cucumber is going to automatically assign it to this desired balance variable. So in here, I'm setting the account balance. Essentially, I'm going to first get the balance to see what's already there. And I'm using a new web service call to do that. Again, bypassing the UI on that. So I've added that to this file where I get the account. And then from there, I can extract out the balance from that response. And then back to this method, once I have the current balance, I do a little condition. If it's not equal, then deposit whatever's needed. And this is the deposit, which is also a service call, again, bypassing the UI. Look how creative I can be now since this stuff wasn't specified to me in the feature file. So I can go ahead and deposit that amount with a service call. So all of this is going to be lightning fast, less than a minute to create a new account and set the balance up how I need it set up. Let's go on to the next step. The customer withdraws $10. Let's go ahead and add that to our step definition file. This is also a that doesn't necessarily have to be done on the UI. So I'm going to also do this as part of a service call. So let's add that. So I've added a new API here for withdraw, and in our step definition, I've added a new when method, also using a variable withdraw amount, and I'm going to go ahead and make this service call. What's next? Our next piece says the account balance should be $90. So this is also something that I can do with a web service call. I just want to check the balance and make sure that it's $90. So let's go ahead and add that to our step definition. And notice here, I already have the get current balance. So this was pretty easy. I just make an assertion here and make sure that the balance that is passed in is what I expected it to be via this get current balance. And let's look at our last step. It says, and a new transaction record should be recorded. Now, I could essentially do this with a web service call as well, but I do want to make sure that the GUI looks nice as well, right? So I've done most of this via the API. I want to just make sure that that transaction record is showing to the customer how it's supposed to. Make sure that none of the details are in the wrong place or there's anything else weird going on the page. So let's take a look at the application. So here's an example of a transaction from an account. I can see the balance, the account number, the account type, the available balance, a couple of other things here. I can also see all of the transactions that were made for this account. So I just want to verify this page. I want to make sure that they're not double transactions here, that it's only the one that I care about. I want to make sure that the balance is right and the available balance, okay? Now, that's a lot of different things that I would need to write assertions for. I could write all of those assertions, but there's a better approach to that. I'm going to use visual testing just so that I can essentially just capture this entire page and verify it with one assertion. So again, I can be smart about how I'm choosing to do my verifications since we didn't put all of the implementation detail within that feature file. So let's do that now. Okay, for our very last step, I go to the account activity page. So I made that in this navigation tools class. Let me show you that. And in here, I just go right to the application page that I want. So again, I'm cheating a little bit and making my automation really quick by not navigating through a whole bunch of things. I'm just going directly to the URL. And then after I go there, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that the account ID on that page is correct. I'm going to do that right there on the page, and I made this little class. This will get me the account ID off of that page. And then I'm going to validate the entire window. And then this piece is where I actually use visual testing to do that. So I'm just essentially calling this check window API, which will verify the entire window for me. So let's look at that application one more time. So the reason why I am checking the account number separately from the entire window is because this is going to be different each time I run this test, right? It's dependent on this new account that I just created. So I have no idea what that account number is going to be. And if I check this entire page, then that's going to be different. Because I'm using the same amounts for that specific scenario, all the rest of this stuff should be the same. The other thing that might be a variable is the date. So when I run this visual test, I'm essentially just going to say ignore this part, and verify everything else. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a go. So I can execute this by running this cucumber test options. So when I run this, it's essentially going to run each one of these steps by looking for this step within our step definition file and then executing the method that is associated with it. So there's one more thing we need to do before we run this. We need to go to our cucumber test options, and we need to let it know to run that before class and after class that we set up in our base class. So we've added that bit of code. Now let's go ahead and run this. So we need to run this class in order to run the features. Cross our fingers. Okay, we see the page opening. We're going there. Some API stuff happening in the back. We go to the account and it's going to look for these things. Perfect. So we see here that each one of these passed, and a bunch of web service calls were made here. We see that going on. So this took care of all of that. And then finally we had our visual check. So just to show you really quickly what that visual check looks like. Okay, so we have a brand new image here, and like I said, we want to run this test over and over again, but this part is going to be different, and this part is going to be different. So I'm just going to add something to ignore these two areas. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to say, let's do a layout region, which would mean just make sure that this is formatted right, but don't necessarily look at the data per se. So make sure that it looks something like that. And I'll add another one here as well for the dates. So it'll verify that information, but not exactly, just the layout of it. Okay, so I can do that. And remember, I added the regular functional check to make sure that the account number was exactly what it needed to be. So we're good to go. And so there we have it. That is taking all of these steps without the details of how to do it, and we're able to work smarter and use API when we need to, use the UI when we need to. If there's anything else we needed to do, like database calls or anything else to make this smoother, we don't have to have that specified in this feature file itself. We're able to control the implementation as good automation engineers.